Welcome to Gracefully Grading. I'm your host, Attorney Henry Gornbein. I'm pleased to welcome as my guest prominent personal injury plaintiff's attorney Ven Johnson as we continue our discussion with regard to areas of negligence that impact heavily upon those of us who are 50 and over and are gracefully graying. Ven, in the first segment we talked a lot about, automobile negligence. We talked about slip and falls. We talked about the dangers of parking lots, and that maybe the advice for all of us who are gracefully graying is stay home and don't get out of bed. Life doesn't work that way.
I don't like doing that either, so I don't blame you.
You couldn't handle that.
No, sir.
For those of you who know Ven Johnson, he's at a different venue every 5 hours and on Facebook.
Small attention span, that's for sure.
Anyway, let's talk about nursing homes.
Yep.
And what I've learned is we have very loose licensing requirements that I think nursing homes have to be licensed, but rehab centers, memory care units, a lot of them don't have to be licensed.
It's interesting. I think the state of the law now is they have to be characterized as either a nursing home or a hospital if they want to get paid by especially the Michigan no-fault carriers. That's kind of where that whole thing is. But as you know, nursing homes are places where folks go when they need a little extra help and can't be living on their own. And so it overlaps, if you will, with medical negligence or medical malpractice as well. What defines a medical malpractice case versus a nursing home case really is the person who is to blame, if you will, for the injury that's caused. Perfect example: if you're at a hospital and if a registered nurse gave you the wrong medication, or if you're at a nursing home and a registered nurse gave you the wrong medication, it would be a medical malpractice case, because that nurse is called a, quote, a health professional that's defined under the law, and therefore you would be having to sue him or her under medical malpractice. In a nursing home, though, there are people who do certain jobs that are not, quote, health professionals, and those are often patient aides and techs and things like that. So if someone needs extra assistance and is not allowed to get out of their bed and use their wheelchair or walk to the restroom unassisted, and if the person assisting them did not properly assist them and drop them, let's say, that is
which happens a lot.
Happens frequently. It can happen in a hospital setting where that would not be necessarily medical malpractice. That would be what we call ordinary negligence. Or it could happen in a nursing home type setting where you would argue, again, ordinary negligence and not have to prove malpractice. The big thing that folks should know is if you have a medical malpractice case, there's limitations on your damages that you don't know about because the law requires it to be hidden from the jury. So the jury that tries these cases has no idea that there's a limitation on how much you can get in a situation like that, which, by the way, is just a little bit more than $400,000, no matter how catastrophically injured you are.
So if someone's, in a coma for years and years, what about the medical expenses? Are those separate?
Medical expenses are separate. Those are not capped. But but this cap, as we call it, this limitation on damages, it disproportionately discriminates against the elderly. If they weren't working any longer or at all, if they're not necessarily depending on what type of coverage they have, their medical coverage as well, those can be parts of proper economic damages. But what matters to most is it's people that matter more, Henry, than it is just the dollars. So if my mom, God forbid, is in a nursing home and this happens to her, why should it matter, if you will, that this person either was a nurse or wasn't a nurse? Why should their damages be limited if she was a registered nurse versus no limitation on damages if she happens to be a patient tech? It makes no sense, and
clearly it makes no sense.
And again, people don't know about it, and any law that requires that it be kept from the jury and not explained to the jury, to me, is a crooked law.
So the jury could come back with $2 million and that gets thrown down to $400,000.
Henry, precisely. I had an $8 million verdict, $8.1 million verdict in Wayne County against a particular hospital that you know. And after, of course, the jury wasn't told about the caps. After the jury went out the door, everybody waved, said thanks, came back in the courtroom, the judge reduced that down to just less than $3 million. So $5 million the jury thought they were compensating my clients with just went away. Welcome to Michigan law. That too, by the way, needs to be changed, and we're hoping that the Michigan Supreme Court hears some cases along these areas in the very near future to clean up this, what I think to be a crooked law.
Is there the right makeup, or is that an unfair question?
Well, that's not an unfair question. It's 4-3 right now. I would argue Republican
Right.
4-3, but we have an excellent Supreme Court right now that in the last year or two have clearly shown that they are an independent, fair court versus what we've had for a long time before that I know you know all about as well. But, and there could be some more changes coming. You know, we obviously now have Governor Whitmer, so if there's an opening on the Michigan Supreme Court, which we know Justice Markman has to leave sooner or later because his term is up, so he'll run, and there could be another appointment, and she would appoint more likely than not a Democrat. That's how it works. It would be 4-3 Democrat. So there's a lot of change involved in the Michigan Supreme Court that we believe that will lead to a lot of these injustices that you and I have been talking about in these two shows. We hope to be revisited and overturned.
Other areas in nursing home, neglect. Tell us about that.
Neglect and abuse, I don't know that I can think of anything worse, right? And we talk about child abuse and child neglect, and other end of the same continuum is the abuse and neglect of the elderly. You're taking advantage of somebody is what you are in either situation. Horrible, and it's obviously against the law, and we have some pretty good laws in the books for it. What's difficult, though, in terms of the abuse, so I had a case where there was a patient tech. My client was dementia gentleman, and apparently he got a little lippy with a patient tech, which happens, and that's part of the disease, and you know
Right.
that. This guy
Exactly.
beat the living tar out of my client, and he nearly died. In fact, he lingered and then did die. And so then when that gentleman went away to prison, like he should have,
So it was a criminal assault, actually.
it was, but then we sued that facility, and of course their position is, well, we didn't know he was going to assault him, not our fault. So it's a very interesting corporate liability, vicarious liability situation where the employer argues, I cannot be held automatically liable. We call it vicariously responsible, as you know. I cannot be held automatically liable simply because this guy works for me, even though he just beat up and killed your dad.
Except the employer hires the person, so doesn't the vicarious liability go away? I mean, it's there and should be enforced.
It is not enforced, and more times than not in these cases, and this goes to sex abuse cases with kids and adults, by the way, where if the Supreme Court is argued completely, in my opinion, made this up. There's no statute, Henry. This isn't a part of the common law. Our Michigan Supreme Court currently, in these sex abuse cases, this applies to Larry Nassar and every other sex abuse case that you're reading about right now, if the defendant, if the person who abuses, and this goes to the nursing home or against sex abuse, which, by the way, sex abuse happens in nursing homes all the time
Yes.
as well, right? So they have an obligation to look for it and try to prevent it. But if the person who they have found is systematically doing this, if they didn't have, quote, prior notice of predilections along the same line. Translation, if they didn't rape or kill somebody else before, you can't hold them responsible for killing or raping your loved one.
Dogs don't get a free bite. Why should people?
Amen, brother. Despicable, and I think it's embarrassing. I think Michigan should be embarrassed to have laws on our books like that do not protect society's most vulnerable people, our children and our elderly.
Falls are a big issue in nursing homes, and often they lead to, if not permanent, breaks, which often lead to death. So it's the beginning of the end. And
Horrible.
what are the areas of issues in that?
Well, the thing that no one wants to think about, but the published statistics that we certainly have seen, an elderly person, well, let's just say somebody over the age of 70, so no offense to anybody over the age of 70. But the statistics show that if somebody falls and breaks a hip especially, or a leg, but it's more hip, their life expectancy goes from whatever, at age 70, if it's a female, should be to about 83. If it's a
Right.
male, should be just over 80, 81, according to the Center of Disease Control that do keep track of these weird things. But their life expectancy shortens to about a year to a year and a half because of all the complications that go along with it. The extended healing, not being able to get up and move, your whole, I'll call it body and constitution, and your immune system are completely out of whack. So you're more vulnerable to sickness and not being able to recover. You're more vulnerable to and more likely to fall again and get more injured again. You don't even want to think about all that when it comes to our elderly, but it happens. And so nursing homes and in hospitals, Henry, they have to be so absolutely 100% on guard at all times to watch their folks and make sure that they're in a safe situation where they don't unnecessarily fall. Yes, people do fall on their own, and yes, it can be no one's fault. It can be. But more often than not, at least in my experience, when these folks that they know that need the supervision and they're not supposed to get out of their wheelchair, and they don't have a monitor that actually notifies the folks, which we have these monitors all the time now for kids in pools. Think about it. We have these little sonar type things. You can put them on an arm bracelet on and let somebody know that they actually got out of a chair or got out of their bed. We have video now everywhere. So there's a lot fewer excuses, if you will, for this.
That's what I'm saying. There are fewer and fewer. There's no excuse.
You and I agree on that as well, my friend.
Let's talk about another area, and this is with regard to nursing homes. Tell us about elopement. And we talked about earlier, I thought elopement means someone runs off and marries someone.
It can. In this case, elopement is a particular type of case that often happens in nursing homes. I've had it in group homes. Folks with, I'll call it special needs, but especially mental challenges, whether it's mental illness or Alzheimer's or ALS or traumatic brain injury and other related issues. That means that they leave the facility without anybody knowing about it. So they're not being properly monitored or supervised. And I've had a case where a gentleman got out of the facility, and it was the middle of winter, and he was probably 300 feet from the door in the middle of a wooded area and froze to death. And I've had other folks who left the facility and then walked into somebody's house or business simply because the door was open and they didn't know any different, and they were injured in that type of area. But this is why this, with the cameras, the advent of cameras and these monitoring devices, and also these facilities, Henry, they hire, we call them sitters. We don't call them babysitters, we call them sitters, where if somebody is a flight risk or an elopement risk, they actually have someone watch, and they get paid by the hour to make sure that this person doesn't get up and leave and so forth. But they're incredibly tragic
Can't
cases.
the doors be alarmed? I mean...
Yes, and that's one of our arguments. In this day and age, they all should be alarmed. They all should have monitors everywhere. And if you go now, you'll see a lot of times there are folks, especially in areas where there's mental illness and so forth, in certain psychiatric wards or hospital wards and so forth, cameras on every door. Doors are locked. You have to be buzzed through. You have to push a code to get through. There's many different mechanisms that we can use to make sure that people don't get out when they're not supposed to.
Do assisted living facilities use these as much as they should?
No, but I think they're getting there, and now again with how cheap they're becoming and how frequently now we have police officers all across the country now wearing body armor. Not just body armor, but body cameras,
Right.
And having cameras fixed in their cars and so forth. We, in our businesses, often have cameras going in and going out for a lot of reasons. There's no reason, if that's your business, that you should be a leader in your industry, not a follower, and get the best equipment to make sure that that never happens.
Why don't you tell us about some of your cases, especially in these areas?
Well, right now, when it comes to the elderly, I call her Mrs. D, we'll call her that. 82-year-old lady, spunky as all get out, on her own. She was walking every day out of her elderly apartment, but she lived alone, did pretty much all the work for herself in terms of laundry and taking care of herself and so forth. She went to the store, and this is out in Los Angeles, middle of the day, 1:30 in the afternoon, bright sunny day on Wilshire and La Brea Avenue. So Wilshire, as anybody knows has been out there, is like, it's like a freeway, only it's just a city street.
Right.
6 lanes, center turn lane, so total of 7, just incredible traffic. My lady is in a crosswalk on what we believe to be a walk cross light, and a street sweeper ran her over.
So you got the city as a defendant.
Well,
or
good call, but no. This was a contractor for the city.
Okay.
But yeah, so we sued everybody that was involved with that, and it took, Henry, 2.5 years of litigation. You would think that they would just say, okay, sorry, Mrs. D. And somehow she lived. She had massive brain injury, and obviously changed the course and scope of her life. We talk about how difficult it is for her to recover. Now she needed somebody to supervise her 24 hours a day. She didn't have a conservator before, was not a protected person. Now we had to go petition the court and probate to have someone protect her for her finances or for her business decisions. So she and her family's lives were literally turned upside down. And finally, after 2.5 years, in one of the defenses was, of course, well, she's old. Well, duh. We all are, right? By definition. We're all going to die someday, but last time I know, that didn't give a street sweeper a right to just mow me down. So, again, these are the prejudices and the biases that we face in these cases that these folks got to think about.
well, did this case go to a jury? Was it settled?
It was settled right before trial, believe it or not, and it took an incredible long time. And again, they ran all these defenses, but when they figured out that yours truly wasn't buying them and we were going to go to trial, then they got real.
What was the settlement?
Well, since it's not protected, I can tell you.
Oh, it is?
That one was $5.25 million.
When you're interviewing a prospective client, what are you looking for? I mean, we talked about proximate cause, of course. We talked about injuries, of course. Obviously, you want deep pockets in the ideal case, but take us through that scenario.
Well, the client has nothing to do with a deep pocket. Deep pocket would be a defendant, corporate defendant, or a big insurance policy. What I look for in a client is a real person who's telling me the truth and giving me the full picture of what's going on. So the personal connection that I feel with my clients, I actually call them my family. They feel part of me. And I don't know how I got this way. I kind of do, I guess, at this age. But the fact is that that's how it feels to me. But it's got to be a two-way street, Henry. So the honesty and the openness, and that's why the attorney-client privilege, as you know, is so important to having this trusted relationship. Right. So when I have a client, whether an elderly client or not, I want to know everything. Give me the good, the bad, the ugly. Give me the skeletons in the closet. Tell me up front. I can handle any fact you give me because it's the truth, so I'll deal with it.
Well, you have to know it, otherwise it could bite you in the back later.
Yeah, what do you mean you forgot to tell me that 2 years before you fell down another stair and sued somebody else and you just didn't remember to tell me? Yeah, no. It's really important. And that doesn't happen very often, very candidly, what the scenario I gave you. That's a stereotype that a lot of cynical people think. But I would guess, Henry, out of my clients, I've been in on my own now, and then even 16 years at the Figer firm before, I'll bet you that 98 to 99% of all my clients ever in my 33 years of practice have never, ever sued anybody ever in their lives ever before. It's a one-time deal. So this cynicism that we have that, and if there's a repeated suer, I'm going to find out about it and they're going to be my client. So, but that's really important. So what I look for from my client is honesty and openness and willing to work with me, because what we do is very, very difficult. It's very time consuming, very costly. And so I actually invest my money in each and every one of my cases.
I think that's what the public doesn't understand.
No, they get, because of, forgive me, the media. Sorry, guys. Love the media. But the thing that the media doesn't do a great job of in our industry is because and some of us bring this on ourselves in our advertising, so I don't agree with a lot of it. And therefore, when it comes to advertising, I feel strongly about a lot of things that you and I have talked about in other shows and other past. But fact of the matter is this. I spend every dollar out of my own pocket to prosecute each and every one of the 300 and some cases that my law firm has in suit right now across the state of Michigan, across the United States. Why would I bring a fake or false claim? It's insane. I wouldn't, because A, I will get caught, and if I do, I lose my law license. Not doing it. B, if I get caught, I lose the case. So all my time, I get no money. All my costs, I've already paid and lose. Why would I voluntarily do that to myself? So then they say, well, don't you know there are instances of folks doing that out there in certain areas? Well, they ain't at my firm, right? And I can't control what other people do. So I'm not going to be worried about what you speculate happens over here and so forth. All I know is that because of the way the contingent fee system works, where I don't get paid unless we win or the case settles later on, I am not going to bring anything but a 100% merited case. And it starts with exactly what you just asked me, that first interview face-to-face with my client.
The other thing that people don't understand is you could put, like especially in a medical malpractice case, which very expensive, products very expensive,
Huge.
experts are very expensive.
Yes, sir.
You can spend a couple $100,000 on one case
Happens all the time.
and never recover a dime.
Correct. If you lose, you not only don't recover a dime as part of your fee, which therefore you get $0 for all the hard work you did, which would be thousands of hours in those type of cases, but all the money that you spend, like you say, 200 grand or more out of your pocket would be gone forever. So people don't get that, and that's the up and the down of a contingent fee system. So you're right, they don't get that, and it's a big deal.
I've got a question that we didn't discuss before, but I'm going to ask you, and that is, we recently passed some insurance reform. I don't know if it's good or bad. I mean, I have some questions about it, but what is your take on it? Because you're in the middle of this.
I am in the middle of it. Before I answer that, I always tell everybody, so here's my financial bent on this. The type of cases that this whole thing changed about, the automobile no-fault law, they're called first-party automobile no-fault, or PIP, PIP cases. My law firm makes 1%, maybe 2% of our revenue on them. So this change of law will have zero impact on what I do for a living. But as a lawyer, as a personal injury plaintiff lawyer, my obligation to my clients is to, and in my opinion, the social justice of all Michigan residents is to promote safety. And so this was a bad change, because what we didn't get is a guarantee of significant reduction in the premiums, which is what everybody wanted, and you're not going to get. And you're not going to get it forever. Imagine an insurance company, y'all, taking the position that they're going to cut your rates. Yeah, for how long? Put it in writing. Nope, it didn't happen. And so what we did is, under Michigan law, we had this provision that you know about, that if you're injured in a car accident, the no-fault carrier, so your own insurance company, if you were a licensed driver and had insurance, has to pay for that.
Right.
Guess who put that system in play 30 years ago, Henry? You know who? AAA and the insurance industry.
Right.
And now 30 years later, guess what, y'all? They don't like it. They thought before there were too many lawsuits and they wanted to get rid of them, so they did this. I mean, you're never going to make them happy, just like you're never going to make me happy. That's why it would be important for us to have these conversations. But I don't know that the legislature in the state or federal is a great place for conversation in this day and age.
No.
And what happened here, this law was basically signed in by Governor Whitmer, who obviously I supported and I love her to death, but this went too fast. And when you don't have public hearings and when you don't have public debate, this was passed in less than 48 hours. Period.
Which doesn't make sense.
Does not.
And especially the biggest issue is, you now can opt out of the unlimited insurance cap, which in a catastrophic accident is going to be debilitating, horrible.
What's going to happen is everybody assumes that everybody has insurance, but we know that's not true.
No.
Luckily, Johnson Law has insurance. Thank you. Thank you, Blue Cross Blue Shield. So if you opt out of the lifetime coverage in a car accident, you're one of my employees, you're going to get your 20, 50, whatever they ultimately sign, and I've forgotten off the top of my head. After you hit that dollar figure, so let's call it 50 grand.
Okay.
One surgery, right? A 1 week in the hospital, tops, maybe a few days. After you hit that, then it would pop over to Blue Cross Blue Shield. Blue Cross Blue Shield's going to, any dollar they pay for you as my employee being injured, they're going to want me as a lawyer. It'd have to be a different lawyer because you're my
company.
employer. But another lawyer, they're going to want them to sue that third person that injured you so that they get paid back. It's called a lien. Okay? We don't know. No one ever thinks about that. So who's going to do all that? Why should some plaintiff lawyer have to sue for you and then give money back to Blue Cross Blue Shield? That's not even the worst part. A lot of people don't have that. They have governmental medical insurance, Medicaid, Medicare. Medicaid, Medicare gets involved. Who pays for Medicaid and Medicare?
We all do.
We all do. What we just got tiddlywinked by our legislature, that instead of the insurance companies who've been taking all these gajillion dollars of premiums for the last 30 years in a system that they created, we've now letting them skate free. Well, not quite free, but pretty close to free. We're going to be paying all of these dollars for the catastrophically injured, Henry, when they should be paying for them.
But we're also not getting a reduction. Who knows?
Apparently they promised 10% in 1 year. And here's my argument. The number one argument was it was too high. We can all agree on that. No one likes it. But until you can prove that it was going to be reduced by how much and that it's forever going to be reduced, you know they're just going to jack it up in 2-3 years from now. Whatever the law says that they can, they're going to jump back on it. So my argument is this. In Detroit, there's too much, too high. You're right. But they wanted to argue that if they made the premiums lower, more people would buy it. Really? For 10% savings. So if it cost you $4,000 in Detroit, so by saving $400, so $3,600 you pay now. Now you're going to pay no fault, but you'll pay $3,600, but not $4,000. Come on, Henry.
Makes no sense.
Zero.
We're down to less than 2 minutes. What I'd like you to do before we wrap is kind of share some takeaways for our viewers on everything we've been talking about in these last 2 shows that you think are really important points to hone in on.
I think especially as we get older, Henry, people take a lot of things for granted, and that other people will be looking out for us, kind of.
They're not.
They're not. And for a lot of reasons, we're not going to have that esoteric discussion, but in terms of distractibility with phones and kids and animals and all sorts of stuff, and just normal everyday life and problems, and our mind goes elsewhere. So as we get older, we got to be more cautious, not less. So you really got to be 100%, like as we used to say, head on a swivel, taking it all in, trying to prevent yourself from being in a situation that you can't get out of. And there are certain circumstances, of course, that we both deal with. It's not their fault. You can't prevent everything from happening. But you really need to look around and make sure that that everybody is paying attention to you, and try not to put yourself in a position where you have to assume that they're doing it the right way.
Which is hard to do.
It is hard to do.
And it's like the old saying, drive defensively. I think it means more and more as we're getting older, and there's so many distractions. And
Agreed.
I think you got to walk defensively. You got to live defensively in this day and age, sadly.
I agree, but at the same time, it's us trying to protect ourselves as much as we can. But again, the onus really should be on people driving and so forth in these situations. We just got to go a little slower, be a little kinder. You know,
right.
If you see someone crossing the street, stop and let them. I know you do this. No matter where I'm at, I'll stop in the street and block traffic to let someone walk in front of me. I don't want there to be any interaction between me and them ever.
Absolutely, good advice. Ven Johnson, as always, it's a pleasure. I want to thank you so much for being my guest on Gracefully Graying, and I want to thank you for watching Gracefully Graying.